So having given thought to all of those requirements and Intel's needs in a location, Ted literally came over to the Thunderbird campus. He was based in the Chandler, Arizona offices of Intel. So he came over to the Thunderbird campus in Glendale, Arizona, not far from there, and used the databases, used our resources to investigate and find out, okay, based on these requirements, which countries in Latin America would meet those requirements, right? Where would we find some good locations? And based on this desk research that he did, I like to joke that probably the librarians had to show him how to use the databases. That's unfair, He didn't always come to class, but he was a very sharp guy. So based on that initial desk research phase, he came up with this list of Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. Now, what's interesting is the government of Costa Rica at that time approached him, approached Intel at least, and said, look, we understand you're doing this site selection process. We're interested too. So they proactively approached Intel, and they got themselves on the list as well. Ted said, well, it's worth a look. So this is the short list that, of course, Ted determined. He ruled out certain countries already. Argentina, even then, was too unstable. Venezuela, even then, too unstable for Intel. The rules of the game too unpredictable. So it came down to these four that the team would actually now go and visit. And of course, as always, when you actually go and visit the place, then it's another story altogether. Now, the first country on the short list, Brazil, definitely was interesting in many ways. It's a huge country, huge population, but remember, Intel was not interested in the size of the population of the domestic market. If it had been, of those four countries, it would have been a no-brainer. You'd go to Brazil, right? There's no more discussion. But Intel was planning to export everything out of the country. So for that reason, when you looked at Brazil, one of the first things that a good investor doing this kind of analysis would do is they'd notice, hey, Brazil has this federal structure. It is divided into 26 states, plus the federal district of Brasilia. Each one of these states has its own independent governor and has a lot of independence and autonomy. It has its own governor, its state legislature, and they can actually offer incentives, significant incentives at the state level, and free land and various other kinds of things. So what investors do is they take advantage of this federal structure of Brazil, and they play one state off the other. They say, okay, we could go to state X, we could go to state Y, and this would be a very good, smart thing to do, to bargain and try to get the best deal. That sort of internal bargaining among the states in Brazil is quite common, and companies that know about it use it effectively. Intel, for whatever reason, chose not to do that, but chose, in fact, to go only to one state. I'm looking again for my nifty little pen here. And they went to the state of Sao Paulo. And they didn't even consider any other locations, although there are, at least in the southeast part of the country, some other attractive locations that might have been interesting to consider. Now, what's interesting about this is the state of Sao Paulo, of course, it is in some ways the most attractive location. It's, has the best infrastructure, has more than one international airport with plenty of flights in and out all the time. Excellent, there's places there where there's clusters of high technology firms in that state that, have lots of highly skilled workers, highly trained workers working in these companies already, excellent top-notch universities pumping out high-quality engineers. So in many ways, it's a very attractive location. But, in the southeast part of the country, there are other states that offer some of these kinds of features as well. Intel didn't even consider that. They only looked at Sao Paulo. Now, what's interesting is Sao Paulo is so attractive for so many companies that it doesn't offer any incentives at the state level really at all, okay? And so other states trying to lure investment out of Sao Paulo can offer big tax breaks. Now, why, I was wondering, why didn't Intel do this, site selection process internally within Brazil play one state off the other, as so many companies do. And all I could think of is, well, maybe Ted wasn't in class, the day we talked about this. I mean, that's one possibility. But it is true that Sao Paulo is, very attractive and would be a great location. Okay. Well, now this is the capital of Sao Paulo, which is also called Sao Paulo, right? It's like New York City in the state of New York. So you have Sao Paulo city in the state of Sao Paulo. And that's a huge city in its own, not over 19 million people in the greater metropolitan region of that city. But Intel, of course, was going to look at a smaller city inside of the state. Campinas was probably where they were going to consider locating this plant. And, they knew that outside of that giant megacity of Sao Paulo, within the state of Sao Paulo, they would find very attractive locations like Campinas, São José dos Campos, other cities, where they would find plenty of highly skilled workers, already lots of high-tech companies operating there, manufacturing there, and so they would find what they needed. So if you look in terms of Brazil, the positive things, the large size mean there was the market didn't matter, but the labor pool was readily available, at least in the state of Sao Paulo. The state of Sao Paulo had excellent transportation infrastructure, and clearly the technology base, the skilled workers and so on that they needed. On the other hand, right, the state of Sao Paulo would not offer any significant tax incentives at all, which, again, surprised Ted. Again, I think he missed class when we talked about these things. And there were some pretty aggressive labor unions active at that time. One of the labor union leaders, Luiz Inácio da Silva, nicknamed Lula, later even became president of Brazil, and he modified his views later on. But at that time, he's still pretty aggressive unions there. And so Intel said, the main thing is we're very surprised that we can't get any significant tax incentives. And so I think that was a factor. Now, one thing that I don't have listed here is really the relative indifference of the state government officials. This doesn't sound like something that should influence the site selection team. It was Ted and others from Intel that were making these visits. But I think that it does. This kind of thing does. People are humans after all. They are affected by this. And, when Intel tried to meet with the state government officials in charge of this meeting with investors, remember, in Brazil and most big countries like this, every state will have an investment promotion agency. Other smaller countries will have one at the national level. And so when Intel met with those investment promotion people, they weren't putting on that much of a effort to attract Intel. They already had so much investment going to Sao Paulo at that time. Intel was just going to be another drop in the bucket. And so I didn't put this in the case, but one of the things that Intel's team did, I think maybe it was just to say they did it, is they tried to go meet the president of Brazil in the capital of the country, Brasilia. And he was too busy, of course, but they did get to meet the vice president of Brazil, and he was not briefed very well by that investment and promotion agent in Sao Paulo. They didn't apparently inform them really about what Intel was up to or whatever. So when he came out of his office, he met the Intel team and said, I'm so glad to meet you. By the way, I'm not familiar with your company. What do you do, right? And so that kind of indifference and the lack of preparation really was a turnoff to Intel. There were other factors. There were these, the labor unions, the lack of incentives. One other factor I don't have listed here was the Brazil cost. The fact that, Brazil, at that time, there was, and still to this day, it's very expensive to manufacture in Brazil. And, the fact that, it's maybe not the most, attractive location in terms of finding a low-cost export platform to export from. If you're trying to sell in Brazil, it would make sense. Of course, there are higher taxes and labor costs and various things in Brazil, but if you're trying to sell in Brazil, you do need to be manufacturing in Brazil. But if you're trying to export from Brazil, well, that can be challenging given this extra, cost associated with doing business. There tends to be higher fees. and taxes and labor costs and various other things worked into this expense of manufacturing in this country. So I think that that was an issue too, but I think this indifference, this sort of the human aspect, they didn't seem well briefed. They didn't seem to care that much, was also a turnoff. So for various reasons, sadly, they scratched Brazil off the list and now had to consider the other options.